Today on Upfront, Congress wants to pause the flow of Syrian refugees into the U.S. by calling for stricter screening. Next, Homeland Security Chairman Senator Ron Johnson on what to do about the refugees fleeing war-torn Syria and how the U.S. should respond to the ISIS-Paris attacks. Then, Chris versus Chris. State Senator Chris Larson on his bid to unseat Milwaukee County Executive Chris Abele. And the year of the outsider candidates. Why are voters so angry?
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Upfront. We begin today with the fallout from the deadly terrorist attacks in Paris and the American response, which is being led in part by lawmakers from Wisconsin. The House of Representatives, under the leadership of Speaker Paul Ryan, overwhelmingly approved a bill last week that would toughen new screening procedures for Syrian refugees seeking to enter the U.S.
It would mean a pause in the program until we can be certain beyond any doubt that those coming here are not a threat.
President Obama says Syrian refugees already go through a vigorous vetting process.
The overwhelming numbers who have been applying are children, women, families, themselves victims of terrorism.
Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who chairs the Senate Homeland Security Committee, has introduced a bill in the Senate that is a companion to the House bill. And we're joined now by Senator Johnson, who's at our sister station, WBAY-TV. Senator, it's good to have you back on the program. Because of your position as chair of Homeland Security, you've been getting briefings from Homeland Security officials. What can you share with us about what you're being told?
Well, if you're talking about the refugee vetting process, it is a pretty robust process. It generally takes 18 months to 24 months. It's redundant. It relies on interviews. It relies on a host of databases. One of our problems in terms of Syria is a lot of the information isn't there. So, you know, we held a hearing on this very issue yesterday. We talked about that robust vetting process. I did introduce that companion bill. I think it's pretty common sense. You know, under Sarbanes-Oxley, we require CEOs to certify the quality of their financial information they provide the public. I think it's pretty reasonable to have the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of the FBI, and the Director of the National Center on Counterterrorism Center to just certify that they've actually used the full vetting process, they haven't short-circuited the process at all, and that the people they do let in, women and children, hopefully relatives of Syrian American citizens who can financially support the refugees, pose no threat to America. I think it's a pretty reasonable proposal. I'm glad the House passed it in what appears to be a veto-proof majority, very bipartisan. I've had a couple of Democratic senators say they want to work with me on my bill. Maybe we can improve it in the Senate.
Do you think, Senator, that your bill will actually come up for a vote in the Senate, or will it be blocked by Democrats?
Well, again, what I want to do is I want to work with the Democrat senators that approach me, talking about maybe what we need to do is also include some reforms to the visa waiver program. In our hearing, we really heard the greater threat was the refugees flowing into Europe, these countries that we have the visa waiver program in effect with, and of course those individuals can get to America a whole lot easier without going through that full vetting process. You know, one of the things they did talk about the refugees, if you're a terrorist, you want to get into America, it's a very inefficient way is to try and come in through a refugee, because it takes, as a refugee, it takes 18 to 24 months. So it's far easier to sneak into Europe than use the visa waiver system to come into America, or potentially travel to Canada or Central or South America and then come in through our unfortunately porous borders. So there's actually greater dangers. But again, I want to try and eliminate all threats to this nation. That's impossible to do, but let's take a look at every program, including the refugees coming from Syria, and do that very common sense certification process.
Another quick question about the vetting process. The president said it's vigorous already. My understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have each refugee being vetted by the UN Relief Agency once they arrive in this country, but then you do have some interviews being done by the FBI, by Homeland Security, Defense, State. What more could we be doing that we're not currently doing?
Let's say you're a Syrian citizen and you've never done anything wrong. You haven't ever been added to the no-fly zone list or the terrorist watch list. You know, you're not going to get noted in those vetting processes. Same thing if you're a citizen of France or Belgium. And let's face it, it was citizens of France that carried out the attack in Paris. I'm concerned that the administration, by saying they're going to increase the number of refugees by about 21% the first year, 43% the second, Do we have the resources? Will there be pressure to short-circuit that process, which is why I think the bill the House passed that I introduced in the Senate is a very common-sense certification that certainly assures the American public that we're not going to short-circuit that process of vetting.
Do you think we're in any way playing into ISIS's hands by changing our stance on accepting and resettling these Syrian refugees?
No, I don't think we're changing our stance. You know, we are a very compassionate nation. You know, people that are under threat of death, that people who have been tortured. I think we will allow some of those refugees in. I think the administration is completely dedicated to doing that. Let's just make sure that we do it and completely minimize the risk with this very common sense certification process. But no, the root cause of the problem, and the refugee problem is a symptom of the problem. The root cause is that ISIS continues to exist. They hold territory. What we need to do is assemble a coalition of the willing, and we need to be serious and resolved to defeat ISIS, deny them that territory, start setting up safe zones within Syria so those refugees can remain in Syria, and then over time, you know, work toward replacing Assad and provide a stable regime, stable government for Syria. But we are not showing the type of leadership we really need in order to accomplish that goal.
Senator, you've said on a number of occasions that you favor U.S. troops as part of this coalition going in to these countries to help move ISIS out of its safe areas. How many American troops would you support sending overseas to accomplish this mission?
Well, I'm not a military expert. The model I use is what George H.W. Bush did when Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait. He very clearly laid out the goal, and then he assembled a coalition. The U.S. provided about 2/3 of the troop level. Our coalition partners provided 1/3. Our coalition partners paid for 85% of that effort. Now, that's a full commitment by the world community toward a goal. And let's face it, Islamic terrorists declared war on the world, on civilization in the 90s. We've had some success, but we have never been fully committed to wiping out Islamic terrorists. It's a long struggle, but we've got a very clearly defined goal right now. Defeat ISIS, deny them that territory in Iraq, in Syria, and let's get that coalition of a willing completely committed to it, but without American leadership. When President Obama says he takes American troops, boots on the ground off the table, no coalition partners are going to do it on their own. They need American leadership. We need to provide that leadership and resolve.
And I know you're not a military guy, but is it 10,000? Is it 20,000? Give us some idea of what you're talking about in terms of an American presence overseas.
I mean, I've been told by military experts that ISIS, militarily, is not particularly capable. I mean, they're being driven out of Sinjar by, with Peshmerga troops who are, really good fighters, but they're not highly trained. So ISIS is not that good militarily. They're sophisticated in terms of the use of social media, of spreading this barbaric ideology of theirs, recruiting people to join their jihad. They're sophisticated there, but militarily, it really would not be that difficult. It wouldn't take anywhere near the effort that the first Gulf War did. I've been hearing 25,000 troops, a total coalition maybe 100,000. I really don't know the exact numbers, but we have to be committed to the goal, because every day that ISIS exists, they're going to continue to inspire the type of barbarity that we saw play out in Paris, in Beirut, the downing of the Russian jetliner. This threat isn't going away. It is growing. It is metastasizing. We have to take it seriously.
And that brings me to my final question, Senator. Based on the information that is shared with you, because of your leadership position on that committee, is the homeland at great risk right now? Is an attack likely? Is it inevitable?
We continue to hear from the intelligence community that there's no specific credible threat. And let's hope that is true. And they continue to say that our greatest threat really is homegrown violent extremists, people that are inspired, through the use of social media in terms of ISIS. That's what we're being told. But at the same time, the FBI director says we have active investigations in all 50 states. We've had a couple hundred Americans, citizens, go over to Syria, potentially possibly be able to come back here either overtly or covertly. So no, this is a real threat. All we have to do is take a look at the tragedy in Paris and realize that we are all vulnerable. Until ISIS and Islamic terrorists across the globe are defeated, we all remain vulnerable. We have to take that threat seriously. We cannot bury our head in the sand on this.
Republican Senator Ron Johnson, who is the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much for being with us.
Have a great day.
Now it's time to tell us what you think. Should the U.S. continue to accept Syrian refugees, all of them, some of them, or none of them? You can tell us by liking and sharing Upfront on Facebook. Coming up next on Upfront, the race for Milwaukee County Executive is already heating up. Why one Democrat is taking on another. Plus, the angry electorate. Later on Upfront, we ask, what are voters so mad about?
Upfront with Mike Goucher, brought to you by the American Transmission Company and the Wisconsin Corn Growers Association.